He's going to take a look at the economic outlook and the travel trends. Dave, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invite for being here again. Yes, so I am Dave Goodger, and yes, I have been given the title, the job of bringing some numbers. So yes, I am speaking English, but I'm going to be speaking the universal language of numbers here, whilst trying to not quite gazing into our crystal ball, but trying to make sense of what we're seeing coming down the line in terms of the global economy, what we're seeing in terms of travel, coming in the times ahead. So for those unaware, Oxford Economics is based in Oxford, UK, or started out in Oxford, UK. We have since grown out of the university many years ago to become one of the largest economic forecasting houses, economic consultancies. So I head up our tourism economics division, where we take all of that intelligence and try to focus it on the travel sectors, trying to understand what the global implications of everything in the global economy mean for travel. And that said, yes, this is uncertain times. Quite often we would try and make a pun of turbulent times relating to travel, but that does remind me too much of my last trip to Iceland, where I was quite lucky to actually get off the island. I think it was with the airplane, but so let's stick with uncertain times. So looking at this, the uncertain global outlook. So what are we seeing in terms of global economy? So thankfully, Norbert has already made the case for why we need growth, why we are looking at growth. I'm going to talk a lot about growth in this presentation. So we are looking at still a global GDP growth outlook. It's still economic growth is happening. We're not looking at recession, but it is sort of some softer growth pictures. It's sort of around the 2.5% growth rate. So it's pretty anemic growth we're seeing globally, and this is quite a slowdown from 2024 where we were last year. The global economy is slowing this year. We expect it to continue to slow next year, but it is a temporary thing. We then do expect to see this picking up over the coming years. We add a load of more countries onto this, a load more countries, regions. We do see a bit more of a diverse mix in terms of activities by different regions. US is clearly following that sort of U-shape that we're seeing in terms of the growth of the drop-off. This year, slower recovery going into the years to come. Asia, Pacific, seeing a bit more of a gradual slowdown, but actually a bit of a peak in some countries this year. And across European countries, EU, UK in particular on average, we're seeing that pick up again this year, but then a drop-off next year before then going into returning to sort of more robust growth medium term. So overall, bit of volatility, but not great growth in the immediate outlook. Why is this? Well, I think we saw a picture of our good friend to the west earlier in Norbert's presentation. Our friend Trump brought in a lot of tariffs, and he's talked a lot about these tariffs, and the levels have changed, and this has just caused huge uncertainty. So there's lots of ways of measuring uncertainty. This is one that we look at. The numbers aren't particularly important, but it's higher numbers means things are less certain in the outlook, and it's just a lot harder to pin down what's happening with any real certainty. When the tariffs were announced, we had the so-called Liberation Day. We've had the tariffs sky high. We've had them cut again. We've had a lot of negotiations. It's hard to know quite where we are. This has eased somewhat, but we have been experiencing some incredibly high levels of uncertainty due to these tariffs. And that means it's just been a bit harder to see which way things are going, and this has influenced global economy this year. So this is one way of sort of looking at sort of how our growth forecasts have changed in terms of GDP. So essentially anything below this 45-degree line, anything in the grey is where we have reduced where GDP growth has come in weaker than we were expecting late last year. So we can see at global activity, the world is in there. Global activity is modestly lower than we had expected late last year. US quite considerably in that territory, 1.5% growth in US economy rather than the 2.5% we're expecting. And that's kind of what you would expect from tariffs, is that fall, as the imposition of barriers to trade, prices, just really will subdue economic activity. You would expect that to come down. And that's where we think things are going to go. but it's the uncertainty has meant that a lot of investment's been brought forward, a lot of purchases have been brought forward. That's why we've seen some of these upward revisions, whereas some like these short-run effects have mean that there has been that volatility, there has been that short-term benefit, but over the next year or so, we do expect to see this sort of all coming home to roost. And how this is going to happen, you may not be able to see in the countries here, but clearly this is, it will in fact impact on prices. Inflation is picking up again in some key markets, or at least it's not falling as quickly as we'd hoped. Interest rates aren't going to be cut as quickly as we'd hoped, and that's something that we're really looking at in a lot of countries as being driving a lot of that growth in consumer spending. And we can see this is sort of impacting people's incomes. So short-term outlook for this year, next year, we're seeing real disposable income growth, much weaker than had been in previous years, weaker than we'd expected, as that not seeing those interest rate cuts, that pricing sort of eroding any wage growth. So unfortunately, it's a difficult time. We're not seeing huge growth in the global economy, and this is not likely to translate into huge growth for travel. And this is also reflected in one of the surveys that we run on a regular basis. This is a business survey, a survey that we do of all of our business contacts, of tourism sector experts across different tourism sectors around the world, asking about their confidence in travel, how confident are they that travel will grow. Encouragingly, when we look at a medium, 2-year outlook, a long-term outlook, there's still a lot of confidence out there. It's just with this uncertainty, this near term, that confidence has dropped off. And less certain outlook. And this is filtered into our activity, so we typically update our travel forecasts once a quarter. We've had to update it more frequently due to this uncertainty, reflecting the new tariffs, reflecting everything. We have been gradually revising down for this year as we've gone each update, but partly this is due to some of the other forms of volatility, some of the other uncertainties, what we're seeing in the Middle East, some impacts specific to a lot of countries in Asia as well. In Europe, North America, though, we have sort of revised down, then as tariffs have been pulled back, we have revised back up again. So it's still looking like a growth outlook. That's the key thing. It's a growth outlook, but maybe not as strong a growth outlook as we would like to be, or a strong growth outlook as we've become accustomed to, and particularly when we're looking at North American market and USA, where we're seeing very limited growth. So what does this then mean for trends in Europe? We are still seeing some challenges there as well, some changing in travel patterns as we're tracking this, as we're looking at different surveys, as we're looking at some of the behaviour. So this is some more results from our business survey. This is all supported by consumer surveys as well that we do run, as well as all of the data collection modelling we do. We are showing here our Q2 results. We're collating the Q3 ones right now. It's showing a similar picture. So when we asked the travel experts, key concerns, headwinds, challenges for travel coming ahead, travel business sentiment was seen as one of the key factors in Q2. This has actually faded a bit now, so that's not it's still a definite challenge. It's not the big challenge, but we're back to sort of the perennial challenges that we've been looking at for the past year or two. It's all to do with pricing. People are saying prices is the biggest challenge. That's cost of accommodation, cost of doing business, are real sort of challenges for bringing travellers to destinations. And this seems to be coming through when we ask for some agreement in some statements. So say, are you seeing this within your destination? So note the first one at the top there, we're asking, are you seeing that consumers will be looking for discounts and special offers? And we're seeing huge agreement in that, much more stronger agreement in that than we had previous year. We also asked, do you agree with the statement that the cost of travel is increasingly impacting consumer decision making? Yes, a lot of people still agreeing with that. Well, that's been fairly stable. So clearly coming from this, costs, as we're seeing a high inflation environment, high costs of raw materials, if those costs are being passed on to consumers, that is going to be a real challenge for destinations. However, we did also ask this bottom question, asking about affordable luxury, saying a trend in affordable luxury is going to be important as consumers will choose premium and high quality experiences. This is something that we saw really emerging as we came out of the pandemic. People really wanted to get out. They wanted to experience. They wanted to spend. They wanted to treat themselves. And there was a real boom in sort of luxury demand. We've seen that fading, but it's now there is still that affordable luxury trend. So yes, people are cost conscious. They're really looking to limit their spending where they can, but they still want that premium experience. They are still prepared to pay for good experiences if they see there is value in it. So it's not just going all out for that the cheap travel. It's not all out going for saving cost by every means. It's yes, looking for deals, but still wanting that quality experience and that premium experience. And we see this coming through then when we look at actual behaviours. This is looking here at how much consumers are spending on travel relative to all of their other consumption. We see over history, we track this sort of stays reasonably stable, but it increases where we see strong years, high confidence years. It drops a bit in recessions when there's confidence or falls or sentiment drops or if there's been some big disaster. Notably, we see it absolutely cratered during the pandemic. And the good news is we're not going back to that. However slow growth is, we're definitely not in pandemic material. We've gone through pandemic. We are still looking at rosy territory in that sense. But what we did see coming out of the pandemic, people really sort of spent, they really prioritized travel, they really prioritized experiences over physical objects, definitely in advanced economies. In the US, in North America, this is sort of fading a bit, and with some of the data that we're seeing, some of the patterns, it's still sort of fading. People are being a bit more cautious in their spending, but it is historically high. In the EU, it's flattened in terms of this ratio, but still very much prioritizing spending on travel. And developing markets, this is very much dominated by China. That travel trend is still coming back. So there is still that growth outlook. And we see this when we look at where people are traveling. This is then collating some of the year-to-date growth for destinations for countries around Europe. So for Europe as a whole, for the year-to-date, roughly the first 6 months of the year, we've seen almost 3% growth in travel to Europe. That's less than that demand that we're seeing coming from Europeans themselves, as some of the long haul has dropped off, notably from North America. North Americans not traveling in the same numbers. But within that European total, we're seeing there's faster growth in Central Eastern European destinations, really looking for that value. These are some of the lower cost destinations going there. We're seeing something similar across Southern Mediterranean, Western European destinations as some of this sort of cost stories. Turkey's had sort of exchange rate moves. It was a real value destination. That sort of switched and people have moved away from it. Germany, there's a bit of a story that's related to sort of business and mice travel. But overall, we are seeing growth, and it's the ones that are offering value. By all measures of that value, it's those premium experiences, but at providing that value for money and connectivity. These are the destinations that are performing well. And then turning to Northern Europe, the headline figures for Northern Europe are pretty bad. It's actually a fall year to date, but that is including, this is on the sort of the UN tourism definition of Northern Europe, including UK and Ireland. We're just dragging everyone down right now. Some terrible data. There's some issues on data quality as well. That's a whole nother presentation that I won't go into. But on the Nordics, things are actually looking very positive. Around 7% growth year to date that we're seeing across Nordics as a whole. There's still some value story there. Actually a fall in Sweden on some measures. Some other data is pointing to more positive growth, but we're clearly seeing a lot of price sensitivity there between Norway and Sweden. You do see price sensitivity between those, which explains that. But what we're seeing is, when looking at what people are traveling for, it's yes, there's some of the seasonal effects, people trying to avoid some of the extreme heats that we're starting to see in the south, moving more north for travel. But it's all of the trends that we're hearing about. It's people wanting, calmcations. It's people wanting authenticity, adventure, outdoor travel. These are all things that are available within this particular region. Comes under the banner of what we're seeing as restorative travel, and people are prepared to pay for it. These are not, across the Nordics, we've got Iceland on here. This is spending per trip, not necessarily the cheapest destinations, as Norbert alluded to. People aren't necessarily totally out looking for the cheapest beer in Europe. If you're looking for that, yes, don't come to this region, don't come to Iceland. But for what the country has to offer, people are prepared to pay. That spending is still holding up. So to finish up, look at what we are seeing in terms of the travel outlook overall. So this puts a little bit more context on that previous one, looking at some of the growth that, yes, we are seeing Iceland currently is lagging growth in the EU, it's lagging growth in that particularly strong growth in the Nordics, but partly this is coming from a relative position. It was a position of strength that 2023 was much stronger, so you do see a reaction. There is that slower growth, and we saw that much faster growth pre-pandemic as well. So looking into some of the reasons for this fall, I think we did then explore what's happening in terms of transatlantic travel. This has been something that we have seen, Iceland's taken a much greater share of that transatlantic travel, as people have been traveling between Western Europe and North America. Iceland travel grew much faster than that. A lot of people sort of stopping off. There was a lot of the increased connectivity came on. This does seem to have, leveled off a bit. There's even a bit of a fall. But as people are looking to travel transatlantic, that will, Iceland's fortunes are somewhat tied to that. So if we are looking at what's going on transatlantic, that may be informative of some of these changes. So firstly, looking at sort of the Western European travel, there is some, as mentioned, some move more towards some of those value destinations, a bit more of an increase in domestic and short haul, but actually Western European long haul has held up pretty strongly, but where the Europeans are traveling to is seemingly shifting. There was, North America, transatlantic travel was very important for European outbound. It was a very large part of where Europeans travel to, but we have seen sentiment plays a very large part in this. This is then comparing the share of European travel to these different regions under the pre-Trump period, during the first Trump presidency, excluding COVID, and what we're expecting now based on the data and the forecasts for this second Trump term. We are seeing there are a smaller share of Europeans traveling transatlantic because of these sentiment effects. If we were to roll this back further, we've seen this before under sort of the Bush years, comparing Bush, Clinton, Obama. When there is sort of rhetoric that's against Europeans, they tend not to travel to North America, come back. Seemingly, Europeans dislike the Republican presidents, but for quite good reasons in some cases. But yeah, we are seeing sort of that drop off. So even though the European travel outlook is still pretty healthy, there's fewer traveling westwards, which then will impact some of that potential stopover business for Iceland. If we look at North America, things are looking that little bit healthier on this sense. Yeah, so North American total demand is pretty slow, as mentioned earlier. That North American travel has completely been affected, particularly that international. But those travelers who are traveling internationally are still coming to Europe, and I definitely saw that on my Iceland Air flight from Heathrow. I was surrounded by a lot of North American accents. So that part is healthy. So we're confident that when North American travel does continue to pick up, that Iceland share will come with it. And so this is then rolling that chart forward. We do see some of the growth from EU to EU, some of the growth to the Nordics in general, sort of slowing, moderating down to sort of more normal trend growth rates, some bumps on the way there. But for Iceland, we are seeing that then U-shape recovery. So as North America comes back, as a lot of markets come back, we will see that travel coming back to Iceland. And just to finish off, just to break it down by the source markets, just confirm some of these numbers. This is looking at number of overnights by different source markets to Iceland, 2024 and 2026. So that very limited growth from USA is still a very important market, but we're seeing limited growth this year and going into next year as that outbound from North America is pretty anemic. Some reasonable growth coming from Europe, around 4%, but patchy by different markets. China starting to come back. We'll roll this forward to 2030, and things are looking a bit more of a familiar picture, a bit more healthy. USA averaging 2% growth a year, most European markets coming back a lot healthier. China re-establishing itself, we expect, as sort of the fourth largest market measured in terms of nights. And I've seen a few people taking pictures. If you want to use the QR code, you can get hold of a copy of the slides. Sorry, I should have mentioned that at the outset. And I'll leave you with this on the screen. But yeah, it is uncertain times. It is still a growth outlook, but maybe not a fantastic growth outlook for the near term, but still growth, and we do expect better times coming. Thank you very much.